Most people think discipline is a personality trait, that some people just have it. They wake up early, they work out, they follow through, and the rest of us are somehow deficient. We tell ourselves we need more willpower. We need to want it badly enough. We need to grind harder. And when we fail, we conclude there's something wrong with us. But here's what neuroscience actually shows. Willpower is not a character trait. It's a finite neurological resource, and every time you use it, you have less of it. That's not a metaphor, that's biology. And once you understand what's really happening in your brain, you stop trying to force discipline, and you start designing for it. That shift changes everything. In the 1990s, psychologist Roy Baumeister ran a now famous experiment. Participants sat in a room with two things: a plate of freshly baked cookies and a bowl of radishes. One group was told they could eat the cookies. The other group had to resist them and eat only the radishes. Then both groups were given a series of difficult, unsolvable puzzles to work on. The people who had resisted the cookies, who had spent willpower on self-control, gave up on the puzzles significantly faster. They weren't lazier or less intelligent. They were depleted. Baumeister called this ego depletion, and the implications were profound. Self-control draws from a limited pool, and using it for one task leaves less for the next. Later research added another layer. When blood glucose drops, when you're hungry, tired, or stressed, your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for planning, decision-making, and impulse control, operates at reduced capacity. Judges give harsher sentences before lunch. Executives make worse decisions late in the afternoon. This isn't weakness. This is neurology. So when someone tells you to just try harder, they are asking you to draw water from a well that may already be empty. The science doesn't support white-knuckling your way to better habits. And yet that's almost all we're ever taught. Here's the part that most productivity content skips entirely. The brain region most responsible for consistent, automatic behavior is not the prefrontal cortex. It's the basal ganglia, a much older, deeper structure that governs habit formation, pattern recognition, and motor sequencing. When you repeat a behavior often enough, in consistent conditions, the basal ganglia essentially takes over. The behavior becomes automatic. It stops requiring conscious effort or willpower. This is exactly why brushing your teeth doesn't feel hard. It's so deeply encoded that it runs almost like a background process. Discipline, from a neuroscientific standpoint, is not about willpower at all. It's about the degree to which your desired behaviors have been transferred to automatic systems in the brain. And you do not build those systems through effort alone. You build them through architecture, through designing your environment, your sequences, your triggers, so that the right behaviors are the path of least resistance. This is why a person who works out every morning isn't necessarily more disciplined than you. They've structured their environment so that working out is the obvious, easy, default choice. Their gym bag is by the door. Their shoes are already out. The decision has been made in advance. The basal ganglia does the rest. Discipline is a design problem. The sooner you see it that way, the sooner you stop blaming yourself and start building systems. But systems alone aren't enough. There's a deeper layer: identity. Psychologist Carol Dweck spent decades studying how beliefs about the self shape behavior. Her research on growth mindset showed that people who believe their abilities are fixed tend to avoid challenges, give up sooner, and interpret failure as confirmation of their limits. People who believe abilities can be developed persist longer, learn more, and ultimately perform better. The belief shapes the outcome. James Clear took that framework and applied it directly to habit formation in Atomic Habits, a book I'd strongly recommend, and if you prefer listening, it's available on Audible, which is genuinely one of the best ways to absorb material like this during commutes or workouts. Clear's core argument is that the most durable habits are not built around goals or outcomes. They're built around identity. The difference sounds small, but it's enormous. I'm trying to run 3 times a week is a goal. I'm someone who moves their body is an identity. When a behavior aligns with who you believe you are, it no longer requires motivation or willpower to sustain. It just becomes what you do. Every small action you take that's consistent with that identity is a vote cast in its favor. And over time, the identity solidifies, and the behavior becomes inevitable. So ask yourself, what kind of person do you want to be? Not what do you want to achieve, but who do you want to become? Start there. Then let the habits follow from that identity, not the other way around. Even with identity in place, there's a practical mechanism that determines whether a behavior actually happens. Activation energy. B.J. Fogg, a behavior scientist at Stanford, spent years studying what makes behaviors stick, not through motivation, but through friction. His research, captured in his Tiny Habits framework, found that the biggest predictor of whether someone does a desired behavior is how easy it is to start. Not how motivated they are, not how important the goal is. How easy is it to take the first step right now in this environment? Fogg's 2-minute rule is almost embarrassingly simple. If you want to build a habit, make the first version of it take less than 2 minutes. You don't meditate for 30 minutes. You sit down, close your eyes, and take 3 breaths. You don't write a chapter. You open the document and write 1 sentence. You don't do a full workout. You put on your shoes. The full behavior often follows naturally, but even if it doesn't, you've reinforced the pattern. At the same time, increase friction for the behaviors you want to reduce. Delete the app from your phone's home screen. Log out of social media. Put the remote in a drawer. Make the bad habit slightly harder to reach, and your automatic behavior will drift toward the easier option. This isn't about avoiding temptation through heroic willpower. It's about designing the environment so temptation doesn't get a vote. For people who want a genuinely clean system for tracking this, habit chains, streaks, environment prompts, Notion is worth looking at. You can build a flexible habit tracker in a few minutes, and the visual feedback of a maintained streak creates its own reinforcement loop. Small wins compound. In the brain, each successful repetition of a desired behavior traces a slightly deeper groove into the neural pathway. The architecture strengthens with use. There is one variable that overrides almost all of the above if it's ignored long enough: sleep. Matthew Walker, neuroscientist and author of Why We Sleep, has documented in extensive detail what happens to the prefrontal cortex under sleep deprivation. The results are stark. With less than 7 hours of sleep, your capacity for impulse control, emotional regulation, and deliberate decision-making degrades significantly. The basal ganglia, the more primitive, impulsive part of the brain, gains relative dominance. You default to old patterns. You reach for comfort over discipline. You make choices you later regret and wonder why. Walker's research shows that even a single night of poor sleep measurably reduces activity in the prefrontal cortex. A week of restricted sleep creates cognitive impairment equivalent to being legally drunk. And the cruel irony is that chronically sleep-deprived people tend to dramatically underestimate how impaired they are. They adapt to the feeling of exhaustion and mistake it for their normal state. This matters for discipline because recovery is not separate from the discipline system. It is part of it. You cannot sustain high-quality behavioral architecture while chronically depleting the very brain structures that architecture depends on. Protecting your sleep isn't a luxury, it's maintenance. And this is also a point worth naming directly. For some people, the struggle with discipline goes beyond habits and systems. Depression, burnout, anxiety, and chronic stress all directly impact the prefrontal cortex and the brain's reward circuitry. If discipline consistently feels impossible, not hard, but genuinely inaccessible, That's worth exploring with a professional. BetterHelp is one option for connecting with a licensed therapist online, on your schedule, and it's something more people should know is available before they spend years assuming they're simply not trying hard enough. So let's come back to where we started. Discipline is not a personality trait. It is not a measure of character. It is not something some people have and others lack. It is a design problem, a question of how well your environment, your identity, your behavior architecture, and your recovery are aligned with the behaviors you want to make automatic. The prefrontal cortex has limits, design around them. The basal ganglia encodes what you repeat. Repeat the right things in the right conditions. Identity shapes automatic behavior. Build the identity first. Friction determines what actually happens in the moment. Remove it for what matters. And sleep is the foundation everything else sits on. Protect it. Here's the question I want to leave you with. What is one piece of friction you can remove today from your most important habit? Not a goal, not a resolution, just one small change to the path of least resistance. Start there. If this perspective on behavior in the brain resonates with you, subscribe. There's a lot more in this vein coming. And if you have a thought on that question, what friction you're removing, drop it in the comments. I read them.